Wow, just wow. I don't know if most of this was done for clickbait or the vast majority of the mainstream media is just this lazy. Of course, there's always the third and most likely option. They found a story that fit their narrative and they don't care anything about the facts or the context of what was said. Do any of you guys watch Formula One? I'll be honest with you, I have never watched 1 second of a Formula One race. The only thing I know about Formula One is ESPN airs it on Sunday mornings during the summer. I normally don't touch on subjects that I know nothing about, I'm not familiar with. Now, even though this story pertains to Formula One, it has nothing to do with racing. This story has everything to do with an issue that we are extremely knowledgeable about here on the channel, the issue of victimization. Oh, woke boner word, someone grab the cucumber. It's been quite a while since we've talked about victimization and mythical racism. With Woke Christmas taking place this month, we've spent a lot of time talking about the gay. We have had the opportunity to touch on every single letter of the alphabet from A to Q to Z, all the way to the imaginary letters plus plus. But don't you worry, my mythical race baiters, I haven't forgotten about you. I still keep my fingers on the pulse of the world of Jamel Hill and Bomani Jones. This evil white man, he's still paying attention. From everything that I've read, Lewis Hamilton used to be a very popular driver in Formula One. Like I said, I've never watched any of their events. I can only go off of my research. To his credit, Lewis Hamilton, he's had a very successful career, spanned over 20 years. He was the first black driver in the history of Formula One, which is why I was so confused when I heard about this story of supposed racism. How can a man that has been named the richest athlete in Great Britain, how can he be a victim of racism? The last I checked, racism was defined as someone being discriminated against based on their skin color. How can someone with a net worth over $224 million possibly be a victim? I started doing some research on Lewis Hamilton, found a couple of instances back in 2008 where he was supposedly heckled by fans because of his skin color at a Formula One race. There was an article published in The Guardian from 2014 claiming the British media treated Lewis Hamilton differently than other Formula One drivers because he was black. For the majority of his career, it seems to me that Lewis Hamilton did not have a victim mentality. He had a survivor mentality. Over the last couple of years, this started to change. When the summer of woke happened in 2020 and the woke train was making its rounds throughout the world, Lewis Hamilton proudly jumped aboard. All of a sudden, he becomes the LeBron James of Formula One. I am using my platform to end this imaginary fight against mythical racism. This supposed war on racism is kind of similar to the war on drugs. The war on drugs here in America, it's been an abject failure. Now, that does not mean I'm a proponent for legalizing hard drugs. I think it was Portland, Oregon, where they legalized all drugs last year. Strangely enough, overdoses skyrocketed. It is incredibly difficult to regulate behavior. The problem with this war on racism, they're painting the narrative that racism's a systemic issue, that it's prevalent throughout government and corporations, when that's simply not true. Lewis Hamilton is living proof of this. If racism was prevalent throughout Formula One, would he have been able to amass a fortune over $200 million? This afternoon, I read article after article of the supposed racial abuse Lewis Hamilton has been dealing with. Headline at the Metro from July 2021. Lewis Hamilton suffers racial abuse after winning British Grand Prix. I read the article. They found 2 examples, not from Formula One, from Instagram, of lonely virgins who tweeted questionable emojis to Lewis Hamilton. 2 examples. During the race, he was involved in a crash with popular driver Max Verstappen. Verstappen, after the race, he called Lewis Hamilton dangerous and disrespectful. Then his sponsor turns around, and instead of coming to his defense, They condemned the so-called racism against Lewis Hamilton. Now imagine my surprise when I found out Max Verstappen's sponsor was Red Bull. Red Bull gives you woke boners. An article in The Guardian from the summer of 2020 described the racial abuse Lewis Hamilton dealt with as a child. Oh, it scarred him for life. The Guardian interviewed Toto Wolff, who's the team principal at Mercedes, which sponsors Lewis Hamilton. What was this racial abuse that young Lewis Hamilton endured as a child? He was the only black kid amongst all the white kids at the racetrack. I just know he was racially abused. What? What? Toto, who shares a name and obviously a brain with the dog from The Wizard of Oz, fails to provide one example of this abuse, not one. He repeatedly claimed that Lewis Hamilton was scarred from childhood and just expects us to believe it. Now, of course, The Guardian, they don't ask any follow-up questions. They don't ask for examples, because facts aren't important when you're trying to push a narrative. October 2021, Lewis Hamilton gives an interview to the Wall Street Journal. In the interview, he stated, "I was the victim of racism by the crowd, and no one said anything. No one cared." He was talking about a race that happened in 2007. Now, I could keep going, but the point is, the more Lewis Hamilton became proficient in woke, the more he immersed himself in the woke Bible and the weekly woke bath ritual, which takes place tomorrow, by the way. Anyone in need of a good bath, head on down to your local Woke United Methodist, and they will baptize you in the recycled water they receive from the WNBA dump. But the more Lewis Hamilton immersed himself in wokeness, the more his popularity amongst Formula One fans declined. He started being booed at events. Now, of course, this was also twisted into mythical racism, since athletes have never been booed at sporting events before. The mainstream media trying to claim that Lewis Hamilton was being booed because of his skin color, when the truth is, he was being booed because of his religion. Turns out, wokeism is unpopular worldwide, not just here in America. Now, this brings us to our latest example of something being spun, something being blown completely out of proportion, something being used by the mainstream media as an example of racism where, in my opinion, it just simply might not exist. Nelson Piquet, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Nelson Piquet, he is a legend in Formula One racing. He won 3 championships in the 1980s. He's also the father to the woman dating Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, they are fierce rivals in Formula One. They don't like each other. From what I gather, not many people associated with Formula One like Lewis Hamilton anymore either, except, of course, the media that covers it. Last November, Nelson Piquet was on some podcast. They were talking about the crash between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen last summer. Now, I'm not sure why it's taken 8 months for this to surface, but these are woke shitfucks we're talking about. If I had to guess, the delay in this interview surfacing will benefit Lewis Hamilton in one way or another. Anyway, the entire interview was conducted in Portuguese, so there's no sense in me playing it back for you. I did, however, confirm the translation of what Nelson Piquet said about Lewis Hamilton through multiple sources. Then I turned around and Google translated it myself. The woke boner word that Nelson Piquet used to describe Lewis Hamilton was Nguyenho. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right either, but it was Nguyenho. On the surface, that seems like a racial slur, and that is exactly how the mainstream media is reporting it. These lazy fucks. Why does it take someone like me to do this job correctly? Why does it take a dumbass sitting in his homemade studio to put in the extra time, the extra effort to figure out what the word Nguyenho could also mean? If you put the word into the Google translator, it translates to English as the N word ending in A. Oh, we have ourselves racism. Call Jamel Hill. Crank up the propaganda machine. Alert the Twitter virgins. We have a new enemy. Tell Bomani Jones to shine up his cucumber and prepare for insertion. Once again, the mainstream media is ignoring the context. Nelson Piquet is from Brazil. This interview was conducted in Brazil. Another translation of Nguejo means little black guy. He simply referred to Lewis Hamilton as the little black guy. But I dug a bit deeper because Nguejo also stands for the N word ending in A in Brazil. It really does. However, in Brazil, it's used as a term of endearment for both black and white people. It's the equivalent of saying brother here in America. Now, I'm basing all this off of what I read from multiple sources. Urban Dictionary. I found the same information on multiple forums on Reddit where people from Brazil commented about it. A site called Define Anything and another site called Renative, something like that. I'm not from Brazil, so I don't know the true meaning of the word, but before we accuse Nelson Piquet of using a racial slur against Lewis Hamilton, shouldn't the media at least do a little bit of investigating? Isn't that their job? It literally took me 1 hour to find that information. 1 hour. Now, it's not just the woke media that ran with this story. Outkick did the same thing. No mention of this possibly meaning little black guy. No mention of this possibly being a term of endearment across all races in Brazil. Like I said, I don't know the intent of Nelson Piquet. I know there's bad blood between him and Lewis Hamilton, but all I'm saying is, shouldn't the media at least give us the entire story instead of just running with the racism narrative? What I do know is this is the last thing Formula One needs right now. They just signed a massive extension with ESPN. I think it's worth around $90 million. The league's actually gaining popularity here in America, averaging 1.4 million viewers per race. They're seeing ratings in America they've never seen before. The last thing they need is the invasion of woke politics and racism. We've already seen how that works. Just ask the NBA. Look, I don't doubt that Lewis Hamilton has received racial abuse online, but who hasn't? Who in the public sphere hasn't been subjected to online abuse? This channel's small. We have 26,000 subscribers. I receive abusive or negative comments. I'm sure Lewis Hamilton has been heckled at Formula One events. Again, what athlete hasn't been heckled? The media is portraying Lewis Hamilton as the ultimate victim. Please feel sorry for him. This poor man's been abused. We don't celebrate victims in America. We celebrate survivors. It's hard to garner sympathy when you paint yourself as the victim and dive into the woke sea. Since going woke, Lewis Hamilton has painted his car black to honor Black Lives Matter. He's pushed the myth of climate change. I sold my jet. Look at me. I'm green. Dude, you're in a fucking profession reliant on fossil fuels. You really want to be green? End your Formula One career. Every time you drive that car, dangerous emissions enter the atmosphere. Oh, poor Mother Earth. Lewis Hamilton started kneeling before races. Then when Formula One fans turned on him, started booing him relentlessly, he claimed to be the victim of racism. Let me know what you think. Like I said, I don't know anything about Formula One. I really don't. This was a tough video for me to make, required a lot of research on my part. I could be way off base here, but I noticed a lot of similarities in Lewis Hamilton's story that I've seen with other mythical racism that we've covered here in America. If any of you have any pertinent information to add or want to correct me where I'm wrong, sound off in the comments below. I'm especially interested, though, on the true meaning of Nguejo. If anyone from Brazil can shed some light on it, please do so. But my point in all of it was the media, they should at least include that in their reporting. They should at least include the context instead of just running with a story of mythical racism without explaining the entire narrative. Kind of seems important to me, but what do I know? Make sure to like and subscribe and click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.